welcome back everyone for the Process Mining Café. I'm really looking forward to this part also, where in addition to hearing concrete experiences from concrete cases, right? We just heard Daan share his experience from how to apply process mining at Volksbank. Here at the Process Mining Café, we want to take a little bit more of a broader view and not attached to any concrete cases, talk about some of the topics that are relevant today for process improvement. Process mining in the process improvement application areas. So in addition to Daan, I also welcome Sudhendu. Welcome Sudhendu to this cafe. Sudhendu already also presented in the past his experiences with process mining. He's head of data-driven optimization, process optimization at AIG, AIG's investment organization, and also talked about process mining and simulation a lot. So you can find recordings from his past talks also on the camp website. And so together with Daan and Sudhendu, we want to tackle some of the process improvement questions. Welcome Daan, welcome Sudhendu.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
So where I would like to start, and everyone who's watching right now, you can add your topics and points in the general channel on the Slack community as well. We will keep an eye on them and pick them up in the course of the discussion. But to kick this off, I would like to start with the question of process improvement methodologies, right? So in the keynote today, I also showed some examples like how process mining actually needs a methodology around it to be used effectively, and that there are actually different frameworks, different methodologies that people use, even within the process improvement area. So there's DMAIC, there's theory of constraints, there's maybe Plan, Do, Check, Act, BPM, right? There's different frameworks that people use. And I'm curious, both of your experiences, is there any specific process improvement methodology that's particularly suitable for process mining, or what would you recommend for people?
So, maybe I can go first here. So, yes. My experience largely has been using process mining in the context of DMAIC, and to some extent there is another methodology which is very similar, which is used more in exploratory type projects, which is called DMAIC. And so DMAIC stands for define, measure, analyze, improve, and control, and that's the methodology that typically is taught as part of the Six Sigma, Lean Six Sigma curriculums that are out there. So, being a Lean Six Sigma black belt myself, I have heavily relied on process mining within the DMAIC concept, and I think where it really fits very well is in the first. I would say in the first three phases. So when you define a problem and then you do the measurement and then you do the analysis, I think process mining is very effective. One of the powers of process mining is that we heard Daan earlier talk about the objectivity with which you can look at processes, right? The quantitative view that process mining brings to a process. So if you were to look at, for example, a typical Six Sigma project, or a Lean Six Sigma project, people often do what are called spaghetti diagrams. So they will map out a process across the different steps, and when they draw it, it often comes out looking like a spaghetti. But that's a static view, usually drawn from interviews with people, especially when you're trying to look at end-to-end processes that cuts across different silos.
Exactly. Just a moment, Sudhendu. I would like to clarify, because you're right with the spaghetti diagram. It's just something that sometimes can be confusing to people who are only coming from the process mining area, because we are also calling the diagrams that the process mining tool produces spaghetti diagrams, but that's not actually what you're talking about here. I learned this a few years ago, that specifically I think in production processes, it's a method where people by hand draw kind of the path that the product, for example, takes through the shop floor in a production environment, and they call this spaghetti diagrams, and this is what you're referring to.
Exactly. Yes. So if you look at process mining, it can create for you those kind of diagrams, but it does that in a very quantitative way. So you can actually see which are the dominant flow paths, what are the delays at different steps. and then you can establish a very accurate baseline of the process. So it gives you that kind of visibility. And then later on, when you do your improvements and you get to the control phase, you can also do a similar process mining analysis, and then you have, you're comparing apples to apples. So it helps you really establish improved, what areas you've improved at. So I think it fits extremely well within the DMAIC framework, and it actually brings a lot more objectivity and power to that approach. Same thing with I would say with the DMETI approach. But I think even if you're using it independently also, as I have used a lot of times, when you're just doing a pure diagnostics on a process, I think process mining, if you have the data, which in a lot of instances, especially with the processes that are done in the IT, using IT systems and applications, you do have a lot of the event data that you look for. I think you can even use it independently. So I think there is value both, as an independent technology, and then embedding it in a more broader process improvement framework like DMAIC.
Right. Which methods do you find most effective, Dan?
We also use the DMAIC within an organization, and the added value of using process mining in the different phases is that you can show exactly how the process is working, and if you implement an improvement in the control phase, you also can show if your improvement has the result you want, and if it is implemented in the organization the right way. Right. Especially within the financial service where we don't have physical processes and products, it's very hard to address where in your process are improvements, and also is your improvement applicable and has the right result. So if you can use process mining because you need the data from your process, then it really helps to have the right discussions within your organization.
Yeah.
And it could be with a DMAIC method, but also if you use a BPM or also a PDCA cycle, it's fact-based insights in different phases of your process.
Yeah. Yes. What was the other method that you mentioned, Sudhendu? So Dan just mentioned BPM and Plan to Check Act, but what was the acronym or the name of the second one that you said before?
I said it's DMEDI, D-M-E-D-I. Okay. So if you have an existing process and you want to improve it, you typically use the DMAIC. But if you're trying to create a new process, instead of analyze, improve, control, you get into the explore, design, implement. So it's typically DMETI is used if you're trying to design a new process.
Right.
Again, if you have the data on, let's say, an existing process, and you want to use that to, build your new process, then you can use process mining again. Again, the whole purpose, the way I see it, is process mining gives you I would say more fundamental insights into how the process is actually working, right? And a lot of times it is not what you thought it was expected to work, right? So broadly speaking, yes, when you design a process, it works the way you're expecting, but then there are a lot of these variants that show up, a lot of deviations from what I would call the normal way the process is supposed to work. And when you're trying to design an optimized process, you need to be aware of them, right? You need to be aware of, what's causing them, those rework loops you mentioned, what is resulting, so that you can put in place appropriate measures to prevent the existence, let's say, of many of these variants. I mean, some of them may be unavoidable, but you certainly want to minimize it. A lot of times, if you have done real process mining projects, you will see that if you just plot the variants, which you can easily get from, let's say, a tool like Disco, that you have a majority of them are within a few categories, but then you'll see a whole bunch of them that are these few variants of different types, right? And that understanding that is critical to designing efficient processes. So again, even if you're using the DMEDI framework, I think you could leverage some insights from process mining.
Right. Where do you see the biggest challenges when you apply process mining in any of these frameworks?
So personally, I've been using, I've been in in this process improvement framework almost like 15 plus years. And when I started out, I mean, data was very sparse, right? So you had to actually, if you wanted to look and gather data which was very detailed, like event log based data, you had to build your own tools to collect the data. As an example, when I started working with the printing industry, and we wanted to track the flow of print jobs across a print shop, we had only very limited equipment that was collecting these timestamps. So we had to actually build our own tools to manually collect many of these timestamps so that then we could analyze them and do some kind of event log analysis. I think that situation has changed, but even today, even though you have all these different systems, if you're looking at end-to-end business processes, you have to go and tap into multiple databases, for example, or multiple applications to collect the data. And then you have to sort of bring it all together and understand it. So again, depends on what kind of project you're doing. If it's a very focused, let's say a project within a given department, a process that is very self-contained, so to speak, then data collection may not be as much of an issue. But if you're looking at end-to-end processes that spans maybe even different geographies, and you have to tap into these different databases and you work with subject matter experts, I think that's a big challenge. So data collection, getting it to a point where, like with many data analytics project, so that you can do the process mining. I think what I've seen in the evolution of some of these process mining tools is that, they become actually quite user-friendly. So I think there was an earlier question somebody asked, can anybody learn it? I think, yes, you can learn it. Anybody can learn it who has, some aptitude in analytics. I think the value is if you've done many such projects, how best you can extract insights. That comes with experience. The more projects you do, and the more diverse type of process mining projects you have done, as you said, when you have the spaghetti, how do you make sense of the spaghetti quickly and extract the key insights? So there is a lot of, so again, that's another challenge, is how do you, from there to the key insights. So those would be the two main ones, I would say.
Yeah, so maybe we can come back to the experience aspect a little bit more later, but I want to first focus a little bit more on the data aspect also, because that's something that I recognize also from discussions that we're having with people, is that, that they realize that there are actually gaps in the processes. So there are manual steps, or maybe not manual steps, but steps that are not directly covered by IT systems. And then what I usually tell them is that the first step is usually that it's a good idea that you use the data that you have. And so you work with the data that is available in the system with the full knowledge that there are actually blind spots that you have, right? So that if there's, for example, then a path with very long waiting time, big red arrow in the process map in Disco, for example, that you don't automatically conclude, well, this is where we spend a lot of time and where a lot of waiting time is taking place, but that you are aware of actually, well, no, this is actually a blind spot in my process where I can see where I know that there are other things happening that I just don't see in the data yet. But it's a good idea to start with what you have, because not always is the place where the blind spots are the place where you actually have the biggest problems in your process. Right? Only once you actually realize, well, in this area, this is really where the biggest delays occur, and we do have a blind spot here, then it's worth looking into this in more detail. I'm curious, Dan, have you had this kind of manual activity, manual task issue in your analysis in the past?
Yes, we had, and as you said, sometimes it's not the most important to have that data, because you have some improvement opportunities somewhere else where you have enough data, and it helps to make such like a value stream map or something else to identify which part of the process you don't have enough information. And if you're in discussion with your client and the people on the site, you identify that there are improvement opportunities in the part of the process which you don't have data, because the systems they are using are not sufficient logging that information, or they don't use any system because they work with email or something else. Then you can implement a simple workflow management system with SharePoint, for example, or have some manual tracking for a couple of days or weeks due to the kind of process you're researching. But there are different tools you can use to get your information if that part of the process is important for you to have insight in those blind spots.
Yeah, that's so interesting. It's like a little bit like what Sudhendu said they did back then in the printing industry, building data collection, basically processes. So, and you mentioned SharePoint. So have you built kind of a data collection framework for one of your processes in the past?
Yes, I did. And with SharePoint, you can build simple case management, so you can track the different steps which are handled for a specific case, and actually which clerk did which work for which case when in time. So you have your timestamps and your attributes to start your process mining analysis. And it can be for a short time to have enough insights to investigate that process. But sometimes you also want to expand the usage of such workflow management, and so you can use process mining also for a longer period and have a research for a longer period of time.
Well, that's maybe a good point, and maybe for both of you also, like how long, if you're manually collecting data, usually that's a little bit more error prone, right? People have maybe to take some extra steps because they have to do some logging in addition to their actual work. If the work is not directly supported through a system that automatically logs the steps that they are doing. So it's maybe not something that you can ask them to do like for many months, but maybe a more limited time. What is your experience with that? Like a minimum time frame? How long should you collect data manually, at least, or any more other practical advice for people who have to resort to this manual data collection thing?
So if your question is like, how much data do you want to collect so that you can make good statistical inferences, right? So I mean, as a rule of thumb, when I go for data collection, there are two things I look for. One is the period over which I'm collecting data. Does it capture all the variability that occurs in the process, right? So as an example, let's say you have a process that sees a peak end of the month, right? So you want to collect data which is, let's say, not end of the month, and then some data around the end of the month, so that you have captured actually both levels of variability. And there could be other kinds of variability, or at other different intervals. So one is to make sure that your data captures the entire gamut of variability, if you want to call it. The second is within a time frame. Let's say you are collecting end of the month data. How much data do you want to collect? So there, it varies. I mean, if the manual data collection is very, very cumbersome, which means that it really have to interrupt their work to collect it, then it's a challenge. In which case, I might even ask for a dedicated resource, a temporary kind of resource whose job it is to collect data, and we've used that in the past. So then the data is not being collected by the people who are performing, but almost like a person who's capturing the data. And even there, you want to have at least 50 to 100 data points, so that if you're trying to draw any kind of distribution or estimate speeds, the throughput distribution, or how much time it takes to process a certain task, you have enough so that you can, when you're drawing conclusions as to what the mean is or what the standard deviations are, you have enough. So I would say maybe like 50 to 100 data points you want to collect, and you want to do that sort of in as much of a random sampling, not like you go in the morning and just collect 50 data points and you're done. You probably want to collect the data across the day, for example, but you want to have 50 data points on how some task is being performed, things of that nature. So I don't think there is a standard answer, but I kind of gave you some of the parameters around which how we structure our data collection activities.
Right. How about you, Dan? How long did you let the workflow run for the process that you recorded?
Yeah, as Sudhendu said, it's different per process. It's based on what's the variability within your process and when does it occur, and what's also the topic you want to research, and you look at those things to have a good insight in what's the time you're tracking this manual data collection. But I think that's the goal you have at first. But when people are manually tracking their data and they see what you can give them for insights with processing mining based on their small work they need to do to collect this information, they see the added value of their work and what it gives for fact-based insights, and mostly that's another additional improvement you do within such a business unit. You give them actually fact-based insights in their work, and they have the right insights to improve their own work.
Yeah, and ideally the interest comes from themselves, right?
Yes.
So I actually remember that there was one presentation also at Process Mining Camp a few years ago by Dimension Data from South Africa, and they were talking about different kind of IT service management processes, and of course there you have really good data that you can use right away, but then the sales teams also approached the process improvement people there and said, well, we also want to gain better insights in our own processes, the way they responded to tenders and requests for proposals and these kind of sales processes, which are more not driven by a formal IT system, but kind of email and documents and the collaboration between the team. And so what they did was very simple. So maybe you don't even need to build a particular solution, but they were just using Excel to manually create a log and log down the actions that they were taking. And what you need to, of course, keep in mind then is that, especially also if you want to mix the data that you have from the IT systems with the manually collected data, that for the manually collected data that you also capture the case ID, right? So for example, the application number or the customer ID or what this activity refers to, and then the timestamp, of course, and what you're doing, but so that later on you can still make the connection between the manually collected data and the actual IT data. Yeah. But so there are different ways to do that. I think the topic of manual data collection is surely something that some people will encounter at some point in time. So I didn't know it was possible to build something like that in SharePoint. So that's a good tip to look into that. So maybe it's a good point in time also to look at some of the comments from the community. And for example, one question that has been asked by Sudhendu Singh is, what are some of the key issues that you face in your journey from data to decisions? And maybe that's also a little bit related to Sudhendu, what you said about how to actually make sense of the data, right? You have the data, you have maybe the insights that the process mining tool provides, but what you actually do with it does require experience. So of course we always say you have to practice, but is there anything else that you can do to become better in making this step and building experience, become better at it? Any tips that both of you can think of?
So I'll say a few of my observations on this. So one is when we do the process mining and we get insights, there are typically two kinds. You can put them in two categories. One is an insight which if you are, let's say, new to the process and you get some insight that there is a particular part of this process which is experiencing a lot of delay, and you get some insights on what's causing those delays. If you go and replay that insight to the business expert, business domain expert, or the business owner, they may already be aware of that, and it serves to reinforce that you have truly understood what the process pain points are, so to speak, right? Mm-hmm. So there are a lot of insights that you get when you do these kind of projects, which are, I call them confidence building insights, because once you share them with your client and they look at it and said, oh yeah, this is exactly what we experience, and you've hit it right. You've given us the right reason for it. And then there is another class of insights which they are not aware of, which are more intricate, or whatever, they're hidden because they were not looking at the end-to-end process. They were only focusing on a part of the process. And those insights that they're not aware of, typically there is some level of work that you have to do to get that message across, right? So as I said, when you go do your process mining journey, you have to really focus in on getting first that level of confidence with your client that the data that you're analyzing, and the first category of insights fall in that, and then the other ones, once you have built that trust and confidence, it gets easier, right, to communicate, because what also happens is, especially when you're looking at end-to-end processes, nobody in an organization has the in-depth view, especially let's say if you have a process that cuts across 4 teams and those teams are geographically non-collocated. Within each silo, people kind of see what they are doing, but end to end, they may not have that deep view of how each silo's work affects the other silo and how that's causing problems in the end-to-end process, right? And that's where the challenge comes. Is you have to find those insights and then explain it in a intelligent way with the proper reasoning on why you're seeing that and what's causing those issues. Because once you have convinced them about the cause of that there is a problem, number one, and then what potentially might be causing the problem, then you can get to the point of enabling the change to happen, right? So, and that's where we want to get, right? We want to not just diagnose a problem and say, hey, here are the 5 areas where you have problems, but we want to in the end recommend some solution that fixes the problem and improves some business metric or performance metric of interest. So I would say that it's and it comes with experience. It does require experience beyond just how to use the tool, but how to relate the output or the analysis of the tool to the real business problem is something that does require at least a few projects and a few engagements to get it right.
Yeah. So anything besides just getting more experience, Dan, that you maybe have any tips, something that has worked for you to become better at getting these insights?
I think the most important to have the right decisions is to know what do you expect from your process. When does it work correctly, and when does it disperform? And if you know what to expect and how you want your process to perform, you can show with process mining how it really does perform and where does it deviate. Mm-hmm. And there you can locate probably some part of the process where it goes wrong. And most of the times we use A3s from Lean to do the root cause analysis with people on the shop floor to have the right insights of what to improve and take their decision to what to change. And with a small pilot, you can see, does it improve your process or not? And based on those experience, you implement it, or you go for and dig deeper for some other solutions.
Yeah. That's, I think, a really good tip, and yeah, I think ties it back also to what Sudhendu was saying before, and helps. I think people, I recognize this for sometimes people who are new to process mining, who maybe are also not very experienced with process improvement. They might be able to import the data, produce a process map, and then they look at it and they don't know really what to do with it, right? And that's the challenge. You can't. The process mining tool does not tell you what to do with it. You have to know where you want to go. So in that sense, that's what you are saying. You have to know what the target is, what the expectation is, and then you can start comparing the reality to that. And that's also, I think, Sudhendu, what I heard from you before, where first, of course, by working together with these subject matter experts, you are working out these differences from the process as it should be, but you have to understand how it should be first to be able to do that. Yes. So focusing on that. Yeah.
Otherwise, every process would be fine and okay.
Yeah, and so maybe tools like the A3. So all of these tools are good starting points, right? To know how to do this.
Yes, and to elaborate on Sudhendu's. You have a toolbox as a process improvement consultant, and during the experience you get more and more into your toolbox, and during your projects you look, what do I need and how can I translate those insights into the improvements we need, and how can we have the right effect for improvements. Yeah,
very good points. So maybe let's pick up one more question from the community. So has been a question from Krishnavi, and he says he has knowledge of machine learning, and is wondering whether they can learn process mining. So what would you advise maybe someone who's coming more from the machine learning world into the process mining space, how they can best learn it and where they should start? You have any advice?
So if you look at machine learning, right? Machine learning is about building an input-output black box model, right? So you have outputs, you have inputs, and then you train your machine learning algorithm to understand or discover the model that maps the input to the outputs. I mean, I'm simplifying it, but at a high level, that's what machine learning is trying to do. And you really not looking at your model. So let's say if you're looking at a neural network model which has weights and layers, you're not trying to make sense of what each weight means and how it relates to the physical process that or the physical model, right? So and on contrast, I mean, the process mining is a very insightful depiction of input and output. I mean, you're still using an input-output approach, right? The input is the event log, and the output is your map, the discovered process map, and all the delays and everything. So with process mining, you can look at your model that comes out. I'm calling the map as a model, and you can make sense of every part of the model, right? So every link. You can relate to what's happening in the physical world. So in a sense, it's more grounded in what I call it's the physics of the problem. The physics of the problem drives the process model that you are discovering. Whereas in a machine learning mode, your goal is to create a model that accurately predicts input and output. Now, how the model actually works, I know there's some work going on, and some people are trying to develop insights into those. I think there's a talk I heard called Explainable AI or something like that, which is trying to understand the model and then explain why the model is what it is. But by and large, that's not the case. By and large, a machine learning model is a black box model. So I think a person who's coming from machine learning, they definitely have all the analytical tools and training to learn process mining. But the way you use process mining is, I think, fundamentally different from how you would use a machine learning model, because in a process mining model, you actually go deep into the model itself that has been discovered and then try and derive insights. And it's a more sort of traditional physics-based, I call it a physics-based model, as opposed to just a bunch of weights or whatever it is, right? Bunch of parameters that you have tuned and learned.
I would agree. I think they would probably benefit a lot from exactly what we have been talking about here, process improvement perspectives, methodologies that focus on really the business process improvement space that they're probably not used to. So that's what you see, right, in most machine learning approaches. It's not about end-to-end processes, that you're looking at kind of different dimensions of data, of whatever you analyze. And actually, we are coming a little bit back to this topic on Friday in our Process Mining Café together with Will and Manuela. Also, she also mentioned something about explainability research, where you're trying to get some more insight into these kind of black box models, and I'm curious about that. I'm going to ask her about that, so I would recommend to also tune in to that. But that would be my recommendation for Akshavi. And if you have other suggestions from the community, you can also maybe let them know in the Slack. Maybe some pointers, for example, to the MOOC or some other places. Maybe some Lean Six Sigma resources. The A3 you mentioned, Dan, could be a good starting point as well, right?
Yes.
So maybe one last topic that I wanted to discuss that maybe closes the loop a little bit, coming back to the starting point of our discussion where we were talking about improvement methodologies surrounding the actual process mining analysis. Now, as you both explained, a lot of the value and the obvious kind of fit for process mining comes in these early phases, like the defining, measure, analysis phases, for example, if we're looking at DMAIC. Now, if you're looking at the improve step, now that's the step where you actually make the improvement and the actual change happens. Can process mining contribute anything to that as well?
I think not to the improve, because there is where you change the process, but in control it does, because you can do that a change effect measurement, and for your pilot project where you implement your improvement and you want to know does it work and what is the effect of this process, you can use process mining over there really good. And also when you have the implementation for the whole process for all cases of your improvement, you can also have over there the change effect measurement. So also in the control phase, process mining will help you a lot to have the right insights about the effect of your change.
Yeah, I can see that definitely for the control phase. It can be really important to close the loop and actually make this quantify the measurement, the improvement of that has been made. Yes. But what about the improve phase? What do you think, Sudhendu?
So I would agree. I mean, sometimes when you look at a process map and you have done that in-depth analysis, you might see things which may just immediately guide you that there's something really wrong here, which you could either fix by changing some practice associated with the policy, the way work gets done in the process. But by and large, I personally have utilized the simulation technology, which to do most of the improvement in complex processes, in the complex business process space, where the interactions between the variables is not very, very clear. And so we try to build simulation models, which definitely process mining helps when you're doing kind of when you're building your simulation models. You can use process mining effectively to build good models, but just pure process mining, trying to do the improvement, my personal view is there is limited role. As I said, there may be certain areas where yes, you could just look at the process mining analysis and find some ways to improve the process. So yeah, that's been my experience.
Yeah, okay. I see what you're saying. So basically, I think, Dan, what you were saying, the actual change there, process-mining can't do much. So then what you're saying is maybe it can help a little bit when you're exploring and prioritizing maybe improvement alternatives that there are, so that, sometimes to aid the decision which of the alternative process changes would have the most effect. So that involves some choices, right? So maybe process-mining, by, for example, helping to build better simulation model, could help making those decisions. So a little bit there. I think I was thinking a little bit, and tell me whether you think there's something to it or not, but I was thinking more like indirectly. And so one thing is like when people go to the doctor, for example, you hear sometimes that it's quite common that they get a prescription for a certain medication for something that they went to see their practitioners, their general practitioner for, but then they don't take it, right? So people, they get like a medicine prescribed, but then they don't actually take the medicine for various reasons. And that's one of the problems and one of the things that people in kind of the medical fields are taking into account when they do studies and things like that. Now, I've heard people who have been doing process mining projects as well, that they had very clear recommendations or very good insights and was very clear what you should actually do. But then the department, ultimately the people who are responsible for the process, they have to be on board with this, right? So if they don't take actions, it's a little bit like a patient who doesn't take their medicine. So I was wondering, because sometimes people have different opinions, and especially if you don't have the data and can show objectively like where the problem area is, then it's quite easy to remain on a certain surface level and to stay stuck perhaps in kind of on an opinion level, where one person has the opinion, well, this is the reason for why we have this problem, and another person says, well, this is actually the reason why we have this problem. And then you can get stuck and not be able to take any action. So maybe that was what I was thinking a little bit, whether process mining, maybe by being able to make things concrete, by taking political kind of discussions out of it, making it more kind of bringing peace into the discussions, right? People can just point to things and say, well, this is what we have. So whether that actually helps to build compliance and getting people on board in making actual change. Do you think there's maybe a little bit truth to that, or is that wishful thinking?
No, I think based on my experience, as I said, when you use process mining, because it's data driven and it's objective, it's hard to dispute, right? When you show the results of an analysis that's based on data that everybody trusts, so it definitely is a powerful tool that can help with change management. And also, the control phase. So as you said, if you prescribe a certain change and people agree to it, and let's say for whatever reason it doesn't get implemented, and then if you implement your process mining post improvement in the control phase, those things will again, very readily show up, and you can use that to sort of have a conversation around, why the change was not implemented or how well it was implemented, things like that. So agreed. I think in the DMA phase and the C phase, I think all four of those phases, process mining is very, very beneficial, and can help you with the objective way of looking at the process and the key insights. On the improve side, as I said, there are limited uses, because improvement also depends on what is the scope of your improvement, right? If you're changing the whole process structure, for example, you have to have a good logic, right? I mean, why are you changing the process structure? Sometimes you're just changing process parameters, like number of people assigned to a certain part of the process, or sometimes you may just change this, what I call the scheduling policy, right? How work is getting prioritized and done. So depending on the nature of the change, you have to have a good rationale on why a certain change will produce the desired benefit that you're interested in. I think that's where just pure process mining, it's hard to do that. to look at a complex spaghetti diagram and say, I think we should move some resources from this part of the spaghetti to this part of the spaghetti. It's very hard to justify just looking at that. So you have to have some other complementary technologies. And as I said, I've used simulation before, and I continue to use that, wherever that is needed. So, so that's my personal view. Yeah.
Yes, but in the analysis phase, I think also some examples Anna gave us. You can use process mining really good to address possible improvements, so which you can use in your implementation phase. And what really a good example of that is in process mining, you can find some cases which outperform or disperform within your process, and also some variations. So that will give you some insights in where to find your improvements or the root causes of your problem, and use that within your improvement phase.
Right. For example, to discover best practices, right? And
yes.
promote them in other areas. Great. Yeah, very good. It all comes back to the objectivity and the objective reference point that process mining provides us. But as we have discussed throughout the session, we need these methodologies around it. And I think we could provide some pointers and some insights for people who are maybe getting started or also thinking about these questions. So thank you both. Really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you both for joining the Process Mining Café today. For you out there, so we continue the discussion in the Slack community, in our camp community on Slack. So please, just if any more questions you can think of, you can just put them there and we continue talking over there. Now tomorrow there will be the first interactive lab session, as really explained earlier today, and then tomorrow at 4 p.m. Central European time we will be back with the next practice talk, and afterwards the Process Mining Café. And tomorrow's day will be completely in the topic of process mining for audit, but compliance questions are also relevant for other areas, so it's not just for auditors. Interesting to tune in tomorrow, but specifically for auditors, I'm sure a lot of interesting points to learn. So thank you all for being here at this first camp day. Thanks again, Sudhendu and Daan, and see you all again tomorrow. Bye bye.